What happens when a quiet grandmother is treated like a burden in the very home she paid for? Agnes was nearly erased by her own family, until they pushed too far. What happened next left them stunned and changed everything forever. Agnes sat quietly in the corner of the sun-drenched kitchen, her hands folded neatly on her lap, watching her granddaughter scrape eggs into the trash. The skillet was still hot on the stove, its surface scorched. No one had bothered to wake her that morning. The breakfast had been made, eaten, and discarded without her. Again. The house, though filled with voices, rarely acknowledged her anymore. Her son Jared, tall and commanding, barely looked at her when he passed through the room. His wife Dana kept her smiles polite but cold, always careful to avoid too much eye contact. Even her 2 grandchildren, once her morning joy, now moved around her like she was furniture. It hadn't always been this way. Agnes had moved in 5 years ago after selling her condo to help Jared afford this very home. He had lost his job unexpectedly and was drowning in debt. Dana, 6 months pregnant at the time, had looked at Agnes with grateful watery eyes when the check cleared. "You'll never have to worry again, Mom," Jared had said, arms wrapped tight around her. "This is your home, too." Now, 5 years later, it felt like a stranger's house. She was tolerated, not welcomed. Ignored, not respected. And then that morning, Agnes heard something that confirmed what she had begun to suspect for months. "She's getting in the way, Jared," Dana whispered harshly from the hallway, unaware that Agnes had paused beside the pantry. "I know she helped before, but this is our house now. We can't keep living like this." "I know," Jared muttered. "I'll talk to her soon. We'll figure something out." Agnes stood frozen, eyes fixed on the cabinet door in front of her. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her sweater, and she stepped back silently. That night, they were planning to discuss her future, without her. Dinner was unusually tense. Dana smiled too hard. Jared barely touched his food. Agnes ate in silence, pretending not to notice the way they avoided her eyes. Afterward, while Dana cleared the dishes, Jared finally spoke. "Mom," he began, eyes on the table. "Dana and I have been talking. We think it's time you considered some other options." Agnes looked up slowly. "Other options?" Dana stepped in quickly. "Someplace quieter. More suited for you. A senior community, maybe." Jared added, "It's not that we don't want you here. It's just, things are tight. Space is limited. The kids need their own rooms." Agnes placed her fork down gently. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft. "So you've decided." Jared shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal, Mom. We just think it's best for everyone." Dana tried to smile. "We'll help you pack." Agnes nodded slowly, stood up, and excused herself without another word. She walked upstairs to the small room they had given her at the far end of the hallway, barely wider than a walk-in closet. She closed the door gently behind her and sat on the edge of the bed. Her reflection in the mirror across from her looked calm, almost serene. But her hands were shaking. She opened the drawer of the nightstand, the one Dana never bothered to clean. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of old birthday cards and faded photographs, was a small, locked metal box. Agnes pulled it out, set it on her lap, and retrieved the tiny key she kept taped under the drawer. Inside the box was a single folder. The title on the front read, "Property Title, 413 West Linden Drive." Agnes ran her fingers over the bold, stamped letters. The page inside held her name. Just her name. When Jared had lost his job, the bank had been on the verge of foreclosing. Agnes had stepped in, paid off the remainder of the mortgage, and put the house into her name entirely. Jared had asked her to hold the title temporarily until they were back on their feet. He never asked for it back. Agnes had never reminded him. Now, she stood in the middle of the room, holding the folder close to her chest. The shaking stopped. Her eyes sharpened. They had forgotten. They thought she was just an old woman, tired, frail, forgettable. They thought they could push her out, quietly, politely. They were wrong. She returned the folder to the metal box and slid it back into its hiding place. She stood a little straighter, her mind clear. The walls of the house didn't feel so cold now. She wasn't a guest here. She never had been. As Agnes turned out the light and settled into bed, The weight on her chest felt different now. Not fear. Not sadness. Power. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start her day with eggs, and make enough for everyone. Just like she used to. But this time, things would be different. The morning light seeped in through Agnes's curtains, brushing softly against the worn-out quilt that lay folded at the edge of her bed. She had slept deeply, for the first time in weeks. There was clarity in her breath now, purpose in the way she moved. Her body may have aged, but her mind was sharpening like a blade. Downstairs, Dana was already in the kitchen, her voice sharp and pointed as she gave instructions to the children. Agnes could hear the clatter of plates, the scrape of chairs, the jangle of keys. Agnes entered the kitchen without a word and opened the fridge. Dana turned briefly, arching an eyebrow. "Oh, good morning. There's still some toast if you want." Agnes pulled out eggs, milk, and butter. "I'm making breakfast." Dana blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," Agnes said firmly, cracking eggs into a bowl. "You all have a long day ahead. I figured I'd help." Jared appeared a moment later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, surprised to see his mother at the stove. "Hey, Mom. You're up early." Agnes offered him a small, neutral smile. "Thought I'd cook for everyone. Like old times." They all sat around the table. The mood was subdued, but the tension from the night before hung in the air like a storm cloud refusing to burst. Agnes watched the way Dana fiddled with her phone, the way Jared kept his eyes on his plate. After breakfast, once they had left, Agnes cleaned the kitchen meticulously. Then she climbed the stairs and opened the closet where her old storage boxes were kept. Inside was the paperwork she had accumulated over the years, tax documents, legal agreements, and the receipts from when she had bailed Jared out. She laid them all out on the bed. The binder she had put together for this very scenario, though she had never thought she would need it, was still there. She had kept everything: the notarized documents, the mortgage payment confirmations, the title transfer forms, and even the emails Jared had sent thanking her for saving the house. Every word, every dollar, every signature. Agnes wasn't just going to remind them. She was going to be precise. That afternoon, she scheduled an appointment at the county records office. The clerk at the desk was a young man with slicked back hair and a curious smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'd like to obtain a certified copy of the deed for 413 West Linden Drive. It's under my name." She handed over her ID, and he tapped away at his keyboard. "Yes, here it is. Agnes L. Morgan. Looks like you've had sole title for 5 years. Would you like that emailed or printed?" "Both," she said. Walking out with the sealed envelope under her arm, Agnes didn't feel satisfaction yet. Not quite. But she felt something awaken inside her, a rising tide she had not felt since Henry was alive. Strength. Later that evening, Jared returned home alone. Dana had taken the kids to visit her sister. Agnes took the opportunity. "Jared, can we talk for a moment?" He sighed. "Mom, I don't want to argue again. Dana and I are doing what we think is best." "Sit," Agnes said softly but firmly. He hesitated, then sank into the chair across from her. She reached into her tote and pulled out the envelope. "This," she said, sliding it across the table, "is the title to this house. I had it certified today. It's in my name. Not yours. Not Dana's. Mine." Jared stared at it, disbelief blooming in his eyes. I thought. We talked about transferring it back." "You never asked," she replied simply. "And I never offered. But you said you were just holding it for us until you got back on your feet," she finished. "And now that you're standing tall, the first thing you want to do is push me out." He looked stunned. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Jared whispered, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I never thought you'd treat me like a burden." Jared's shoulders slumped, the paper between them as heavy as stone. "You didn't just forget who paid for this house, Jared. You forgot who raised you to begin with." He didn't answer. Couldn't. Agnes rose quietly. "You can sleep on it. Tomorrow we'll talk again. With Dana." Upstairs in her room, Agnes sat on the bed and exhaled slowly. She had finally spoken her truth. Not angrily. Not spitefully. Just clearly. She wasn't planning anything. She wasn't threatening anything. She was simply taking her place. And from this point forward, she would not be moved. The next morning arrived with the distant rumble of thunder. Clouds hung low, casting a grey hush over the neighborhood. Agnes rose early and prepared coffee, her movements slow but deliberate. The house was still silent. Jared hadn't come out of his room yet, and Dana and the children hadn't returned from their visit. Agnes sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the deed spread before her once more. She reread the document, not because she doubted it, but because it felt important to acknowledge it again. This paper wasn't just legal proof, it was a symbol. A reminder that she was not a guest, not temporary, not weak. Jared finally emerged close to 9, looking worn. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her without a word. The silence between them stretched thickly. "I talked to Dana last night," he said eventually. Agnes didn't respond. "She's not happy," he continued, choosing each word carefully. "She doesn't understand why you would do this." "Do what, Jared?" Agnes asked, raising an eyebrow. "Own the house I paid for? Stay quiet while your wife planned to remove me from it?" Jared rubbed his forehead, clearly agitated. "She thinks this is some kind of revenge." "Then she doesn't know me at all," Agnes replied coldly. Another silence. "She's coming back tonight," he added. "We need to talk, all three of us." Agnes nodded once. "Fine." The rest of the day passed with a strange unease. Agnes went about her routine, dusting the living room shelves, folding laundry, and replanting a dying basil pot by the kitchen window. Jared remained mostly in the garage, hammering away at something that didn't seem to need fixing. By evening, the sound of the garage door signaled Dana's return. The children raced in first, calling half-hearted hellos before disappearing upstairs. Dana entered moments later, her face tight, her eyes hard. Agnes stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. "There's dinner if you're hungry." "I'm not," Dana said flatly. They gathered around the dining room table once the children were settled in. Agnes sat at one end, Jared in the middle, and Dana across from her. "So," Dana began, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, "you've decided to throw all this in our faces? After everything?" Agnes remained calm. "I'm stating facts. You both tried to remove me from the house I own. I'm making sure that doesn't happen." Dana scoffed. "You own it on paper. But this is our life. Our family. You've turned it into a courtroom." "I turned nothing," Agnes replied. "You made choices. I simply reminded you what those choices would cost." Jared tried to interject. "Let's not." "No, let's," Dana snapped. "Because for 5 years we treated her like family, and now she's acting like some land baron." Agnes stood up, slowly, voice calm but edged. "You replaced my photos with your decorations. You locked my tea in the laundry cabinet. You rearranged the entire kitchen and never told me. You didn't treat me like family. You tolerated me. You tolerated me until you thought I was powerless." Dana flushed deeply. "You're twisting this." "No," Agnes said. "I'm remembering it clearly." The silence that followed was heavy and hot. Jared rubbed his temples, clearly unraveling. "What do you want, Mom?" he asked finally. "What's your goal here?" Agnes looked him in the eyes. "To be treated like someone who matters. Like someone who belongs." Dana stood up. "This isn't going to work. We can't live under threat." Agnes didn't rise. "Then leave." The words dropped like a stone. Dana's face contorted, and Jared inhaled sharply. "You're asking us to leave," he said, shocked. "I'm not asking," Agnes replied, her voice steady. "This is my home. I'm willing to share it. But I won't be pushed out of it." Dana's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." "No," Agnes said softly. "You will." Dana stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the bedroom. Jared remained seated, staring blankly at the table. Agnes gathered the dishes, washed them quietly, and returned to her room without another word. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, but resolute. The foundation under her had shifted, and now everyone in the house would have to adjust to the new shape of things. No more silence. No more passivity. This time, Agnes stood firm, and the house finally began to feel like hers again. The morning after the confrontation simmered in silence. The house was still. No footsteps thundered on the stairs. No hum of kitchen chatter. Even the children, usually noisy and energetic, tiptoed around as if the walls themselves had been warned. Agnes moved with the quiet grace of someone who had nothing left to fear. She made her tea, buttered her toast, and sat by the window with the newspaper, just as she used to before she'd learned how small she had been made to feel. Down the hall, Jared and Dana spoke in hushed voices behind a closed door. It wasn't long before Dana left the house entirely. No goodbyes, no slamming doors this time. Just the sound of her car pulling away. Jared emerged not long after, clearly disheveled. He looked at his mother but said nothing. He sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the floor. Agnes didn't speak. She let the silence press its weight. Finally, he looked up. "She's gone to her sister's. Says she needs space." Agnes nodded. "We all do." Jared rubbed his hands together. She's thinking about lawyers. About forcing some kind of change." Agnes set her teacup down. "I've already spoken to mine. Everything is in order." He nodded again, slowly. There was something different in his expression now. Not anger. Not resistance. Something quieter. Weariness. Defeat. "I didn't want it to get this far, Mom," he said. "You let it," she replied. "And now here we are." The day passed in slow motion. Agnes cleaned the house, not out of obligation but out of ritual. She re-established her presence with every dusted shelf, every folded towel. The walls were hers again. Not legally. Not emotionally. Practically. Late in the afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. Agnes opened it to find Dana standing stiffly, her jaw tight. "I'm only here to pick up some things," she said coolly. "I won't stay long." Agnes stepped aside without a word. Dana moved briskly through the house, gathering bags and containers, barely acknowledging anyone. She passed Agnes in the hallway and paused only briefly. "I never imagined you'd pull something like this," she muttered. Agnes turned to face her. "That's because you never bothered to know me. You only saw what you needed." Dana's eyes narrowed. "You're destroying this family." Agnes didn't blink. "No. I'm reminding this family who built the foundation it's standing on." Without another word, Dana brushed past and out the door, letting it close behind her with finality. That night, Jared sat at the dinner table alone while Agnes served soup and bread. The air was heavy. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, "about all the years you helped us. All the things I've taken for granted." Agnes ladled soup into his bowl. "You had time to see it. You chose not to. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't belong." "But you did," Agnes said. "And that's what matters. Not the intention. The result." He nodded, his eyes stinging. "I want to fix it." Agnes sat down across from him, folding her hands. "Then start by respecting the people who've sacrificed for you. Not just when it's convenient." Dinner passed in quiet reflection. The wind picked up outside, rustling the trees. Inside, there was a subtle shift. Something settling. Later, Agnes stood in the living room, looking at the family portraits that had once been hidden away. She returned them to the mantel, placing them carefully beside the newer ones. Her face joined theirs again. Not as an afterthought. As a pillar. As night fell, she walked through the rooms slowly. Each one felt familiar again, not just in memory but in presence. Her hands had touched every wall. Her laughter had once filled this space. Her grief had soaked into its floors. And now her strength had reclaimed it. She was not a shadow in someone else's home. She was the light in her own. And even if no one else ever admitted it aloud, Agnes knew the truth. She was the reason they had a roof over their heads to begin with. And she would no longer be forgotten. The next few days unfolded like slow-burning incense, quiet, steady, but never quite peaceful. Dana remained absent. Jared kept to himself, often taking long walks and returning only when the streetlights flickered on. The children, confused by the change, asked questions that Jared struggled to answer and Agnes chose not to. They were too young to understand ownership and betrayal. Agnes spent time restoring corners of the house that had become unfamiliar. She moved her chair back into the living room, positioned by the window where she used to knit during the winters. She brought her books back down from storage and reassembled her recipe binders, slotting them back into the kitchen cupboard like sacred scrolls. She also visited Peter Gallagher, her attorney, one final time. "It's all secure now," he confirmed, flipping through his copy of the property deed. "If they try anything legally, they'll lose. You have the full paper trail, and the house is indisputably yours." Agnes nodded. "I'm not trying to destroy them, Peter. I just want to live without being erased." "Then you've already succeeded," he said. "But if things escalate, I'm only a phone call away." That evening, Jared came home with a manila envelope. He laid it gently on the dining table where Agnes was organizing mail. "I spoke to a lawyer," he said quietly. "I wanted to see if there was any path forward that didn't involve courtrooms or more hurt. They advised me to be honest. So, here it is." Agnes opened the envelope. Inside were handwritten notes, copies of their past financial agreements, a timeline Jared had built outlining everything she had contributed, including the initial payoff that saved the house. She looked up at him, unsure what to say. "It's not a legal document," he said. "It's a start. An acknowledgement. Something I should have done years ago." Agnes felt something twist in her chest, something old and bruised but not yet broken. "Thank you," she said. "This doesn't erase the damage, but it shows me you're still trying." They stood in that room a long time, saying nothing, letting the stillness speak. Later that night, Agnes sat at her desk and wrote a letter, not to Jared or Dana, but to herself. A reckoning of what she had endured, what she had learned, and how she had come to reclaim her voice. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in the metal box beside the deed, a kind of time capsule for herself. A reminder. The next morning, Dana returned unannounced. Agnes was in the backyard, pruning the rose bushes, when she heard the side gate creak open. Dana stepped into view, her arms crossed but her expression less sharp than usual. "I came to see the kids," she said simply. "They're inside," Agnes replied, not turning from her work. Dana hesitated, then added, "You're still angry." Agnes straightened. "I'm still here. That should be enough." Dana didn't reply. Instead, she walked toward the house. But before reaching the door, she stopped and turned. "I don't know how to undo what I did. But I know I did it." Agnes met her gaze. "Then don't undo it. Learn from it. That's harder, but worth more." Dana nodded faintly and disappeared into the house. That night, for the first time in weeks, the family sat together for dinner. The air was still uncertain, the conversation sparse. But Agnes's chair was back at the table's head, where it once belonged. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer hesitant. And when she was silent, it wasn't because she'd been silenced. As she cleared the plates afterward, Jared came up beside her. "You've changed," he said. Agnes looked at him. "No. You've just finally seen me." He nodded, humbled. "I'm sorry." "Keep being," she said. "Sorry is a verb, not just a word." As the house quieted and the night deepened, Agnes returned to her room. She sat at the desk and looked out the window, the soft glow of streetlights painting quiet lines across the wall. She thought about everything, the whispered conversations behind her back, the hollow promises, the nearly invisible lines of erasure she had endured. And how she had stood through it all, steady. They thought she was old. They thought she was weak. But the truth was finally blooming, unmistakably, in every room of her house. She had been the foundation all along. Spring arrived slowly, washing the neighborhood in green and gold. The trees outside Agnes's window were budding again, just as they did every year, but somehow this time the sight felt different. Not because the trees had changed, but because she had. The house, once a place of quiet disregard, now pulsed with a new rhythm. There were still moments of tension, but they no longer defined the days. The children once again gravitated toward Agnes's room, eager for bedtime stories and homemade cookies. Even Dana, while still cautious, had shifted. Her tone was softer, her eyes more open. She didn't apologize often, but she listened more, and that was something. Jared, for his part, had begun repairing not just relationships, but the structure of their lives. He returned Agnes's chair to its original place in the living room. He invited her opinion during family discussions. He asked, not assumed, about her plans. One Sunday morning, he knocked gently on her door. "Can we talk?" Agnes looked up from her knitting. "Of course." He entered, holding 2 cups of tea. He set one beside her, then sat in the chair across from her, legs tapping nervously. "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to help us. Not just live here, but guide us. Help us make this house a real home again. Together." Agnes studied his face. There was no performance in his voice, no manipulation. Just a son, uncertain and sincere. She smiled. "That depends. Will I be treated as an equal?" "Yes," he said immediately. "You already are. We just failed to see it." Agnes sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle. "Then I'll help." They spent the day rearranging furniture, planning meals, even setting up a new chore chart that included everyone, adults and children alike. Agnes insisted on adding herself to the list. "I may be retired," she said with a wink, "but I'm not dead." The kids giggled, and even Dana cracked a smile. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a new kind of peace. Agnes resumed her gardening, filling the backyard with color and scent. She hosted Sunday dinners, where laughter once again filled the rooms. Dana began asking her for recipes. Jared often joined her on the porch in the evenings, where they'd watch the sun dip behind the trees, sipping tea in comfortable silence. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the county clerk's office. Agnes opened it carefully. Inside was a cleanly formatted document, a legal reaffirmation of property ownership. Not that she needed the reminder, but she placed it in her drawer beside the deed, smiling as she did. That night, the family sat around the dining table for dinner. A new photo hung on the wall, one that Dana had framed without being asked. It was of the entire family in the backyard, arms around each other, smiling. Agnes sat in the center. As they ate, the children shared their school stories. Dana described a new recipe she wanted to try, and Jared asked Agnes about her favorite vacation memory with their father. Agnes spoke, and everyone listened. After dinner, Jared stood and raised a glass. "To Mom," he said. "Not just the woman who gave us this home, but the woman who taught us what it means to protect it." Glasses clinked. Agnes looked around the table, the one she'd been nearly erased from, and smiled. They thought she was old. They thought she was weak. But now they understood. She was the foundation. And she had never stopped being strong.